Welcome back to Coach2Scale, the podcast where we dive deep into how great leaders grow themselves and their teams. And this week I'm joined by Michael Janes. He's someone I go way back with. Michael's the co-founder of Rapid Commercialization Partners and managing partner at RCP Venture Capital. Michael's career spans leadership roles at places like Oracle, ADP, Infor, and Benefits Focus. And he's got experience across the board: sales, ops, finance, private equity. An avid boater who knows how to fish where the fish are, Michael brings a sharp lens to go-to-market strategy, especially when it comes to selling into the strategy behind the capital. We talk about the power of curiosity, the importance of relationships, and why showing up early still matters. Hey, and if you enjoy the conversation, follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Coach2Scale YouTube channel. We'd love to hear what resonates with you. Let's go. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Benelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. This week on Coach2Scale, I'm joined by Michael Janes, co-founder and CRO of Rapid Commercialization Partners and managing partner at RCP Venture Capital. He's done it all: sales, ops, finance, private equity, with leadership stints at some great companies: Benefits Focus, ADP, Infor, and way back when, Oracle, where I first met him, where we crossed paths at the turn of the century. Believe it or not, Michael, like crazy stuff. Now, Michael's not just a business builder. He's an avid boater who knows, most importantly, how to fish where the fish are. And we're going to talk about that theme as we get into it. Michael Janes, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Thanks, Matt. Good to see you. And it has been 25 years since you and I started to engage together. It's nice to stay connected.
Quarter century. Remember going fishing? Were you there? You can say no if you don't want to be associated with this. Remember going fishing and one of the guys we went fishing with brought a shotgun?
I do. And I remember his name.
Okay. All right. That just popped into my head. We'll just keep going. Anybody out there, DM me for more information. So Michael, the first question I'll start off with, oh my God. The first question I'll start off with is what I call a myth buster question here. What's a myth in this business of coaching, business building, leading that you think is misguided, maybe even complete BS?
Yeah, Matt, I'll take us back to our years, 25 years ago at Oracle, where, I remember sitting at my desk and it was 50 calls a day, right? And remembering I got to make that next call. I know you were coming in on weekends when you started, right? Make those calls, to make those numbers. And to me, that's something that has really stuck with me. And the positive side of that has really been, it's activity and consistency. But I think the myth is really, you got to make as many calls as you can, which I think is pretty misguided. And to me, it's always been about taking that very targeted approach, understanding your client's business without going, too deep, because you do need to have that level of activity. But that pure, you just got to make the calls, to me has always been something I've just really taken quite negatively and tried to turn it to a positive, to say, what's the positive piece there? Let's create consistency and the activity level, but with purpose.
Right. So, I mean, because we've learned a lot over the years, right? And it's not just, spaghetti selling, throwing anything against the wall to as many people as possible and seeing what happens, right? I think Arthur Red Motley had a saying, many, many years ago: know your products, know your customers, call them incessantly and ask them to buy. Well,
Correct.
While there is some truth to that, there's obviously, more behind it. But activity is important, and consistency and purpose is also important, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Yeah, that
Exactly.
makes a ton of sense. So, I found a couple of our, what I'll call prep calls leading up to this, really interesting. And, you made me hearken back to a saying my grandfather had. He would always say, follow the money. Now, here's this guy. He was a construction guy. He had a small construction company. He knew nothing about finance or sales or anything. So, back in in the early 1980s, when he was telling, a 13-year-old this, follow the money, it's open to interpretation what he actually meant. But,
Right.
I know you have a point of view on this, and it's something that it's meant, it was important to you for a long time. What do you think about that phrase, follow the money?
Yeah, I think I've had leaders that have used those words, follow the money. And I think over the decades that has really evolved to sell to the strategy behind the capital, right? Because follow the money to me really means understanding what's driving a business and where is that capital coming from. And I think organizations function differently when you look at that capital structure, right? So if you've got a family owned business, they're going to make very different decisions than if they are private equity owned with a majority ownership, or if they're a public company. And I think it's so critical to understand that structure as you look at a sales rep who's truly trying to create value, right? That's what we're trying to do, but really understand, what is in that example of a private equity firm? What are their goals for that portfolio company? And how are you going to align to that? And I think that understanding follow the money really is sell to the strategy behind the capital, which I think is going to be, always has been incredibly helpful for me in my career.
Okay, so I'm a salesperson in some, XYZ B2B SaaS company. What does that mean to me?
Right. I think as that individual salesperson, it's many times I've seen it early in my career. We find our comfort level, whether that's working with a director or a VP level, and again, this notion of sell to the strategy behind the capital, that really requires that you start to move up within the organization. Or for me, my comfort level is starting at that level and moving down through the organization. And instead of just calling and talking about features and functionality that might align to a project, let's start to understand the organization overall. And there are so many different sources where you can really dig in and understand what are their goals for the next, year, mid to short term, and really start to align with that. And I would go one step further. And when you can start to identify who are the investors, and specifically say a private equity firm or a venture capital fund, how does this individual organization fit into their overall portfolio, right? And what do some of the other exits look like? And what are those goals for the organization? For me in my current role at Rapid Commercialization Partners, I'm always looking to understand what are the goals for that organization in terms of their exit, right? So for an early stage clinical biotech company, are they looking to take this drug to commercial? Are they looking to go public? Are they looking to spin this off to another PE firm? And I think understanding that really is critical to that individual sales rep in terms of positioning an opportunity. And at the end of the day, creating value, because that's really what we're trying to do for our clients.
Well, you talk about positioning the opportunity. You talked about it in terms of how the salesperson positions it to, let's say, their main point of contact.
Yeah, right.
But also how that executive sponsor, if you will, how that person internally positions this project to their constituents, their colleagues internally, right? Because
That's right.
if you're helping plant the seed for the messaging, you're actually, helping that person sell for you internally. You're creating that internal salesperson, that internal champion, right?
That's right. That's right. And actually, I view this as an interesting way to create that internal committee, right? That's looking to do this. And for me, it's about, I've always said it's the power of the question, right? So as I'm engaging with private equity firms or venture capital funds, I do a full analysis of their portfolio. And if we're talking about XYZ company, understanding what are their goals for that organization. But my goal is really to get a board member or an operating partner to ask a question of a senior executive, right? To say, hey, if we can really save $10 million by initiating some of these early commercialization activities, earlier than later? and getting them to ask that question of a senior executive, guess what just happened? We initiated a process, and we initiated a value creation process that now flows down in the organization rather than trying to push a rock up the hill. And it's probably one of my biggest lessons that I've learned over the years is you really have to align, again, going back to our theme here, Matt, of sell to the strategy behind the capital, and being able to align with those board members, operating partners, managing directors, and get them to ask that question of your constituent is really a nice way to work together to at the end of the day, add value to that organization.
So is that a better question than, I'm your new account rep, can you tell me what projects you're working on?
I would think so. Like understanding the
I'm kidding.
organization.
I was being rhetorical. I'm facetious,
Yeah,
of course, but we both heard that question being asked way too many
yes, we
times.
have.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or
So,
even Matt, understanding, I distinctly remember sitting with you in the conference room at Oracle and
uh-oh.
having some of those account reviews, and salespeople would come in and they could tell you everything about the deal, right? The structure of the deal, what the solution looked like. And, you'd say, well, what does the organization do? Oh, well, they're an engineering firm. Right. So tell me more about that. Matt, I remember you doing that, putting these, folks in the hot seat. And I learned very early, I'm not coming into a review with Matt without understanding the client's business. I mean, how many times did that happen?
Oh, it happens all the time. But let me tell you, this is like therapy, this podcast. So I'm gonna break something here. So that question was asked of me in 1999 by my then director, Scott Stanley. I don't know if you remember Scott. I think he may have left before you got there. But one of my accounts was REI, and at the time I didn't know what REI did.
Yeah.
And he said, what does REI, what does REI stand for? And I said, I don't know what I said, but I didn't say, the right name.
Yeah.
I said something total off. He's like, oh, I thought it was Recreational Equipment Incorporated, which I think it is, right?
Yeah.
And no, it's blah, blah, blah. Like I said it confidently. He's like, oh, okay. And like, what does that business do? And I totally made it up. And, it didn't seem to bite me in the ass. Like I hit my number. I went to club. I got promoted, but I'll never forget that. I never wanted to be. I was horrified. Like I was embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I knew what my company's acronyms were. I knew what their business did, and it totally shifted. As we went into this century. So that was that was the last century, Matt.
Well, you helped me avoid that situation because I remember, distinctly coming into my own forecast meetings and being asked that question and, watching it happen in front of the sales reps. And it really is, the opportunity to help your team understand that those are the sorts of questions you're going to be asking, but there's a reason behind that. Sell to the strategy behind the capital, understand what the company's trying to do. What is their business model? But this notion of taking it up another level and understanding the capital behind it and the goals associated with that investor is really critical and can really differentiate yourself in a process.
So how can managers help their people follow the money or sell to the strategy behind the capital?
Right. Well, I think the first thing, Matt, is being very comfortable to be able to engage at a senior level, because those sorts of conversations are not going to have at the manager or director level. And you really need to be prepared, like help those teams be prepared to engage with those conversations. And, I think when you start to take a step back and understand the business, understand the investors, and to really take the time, you're going to have some very fun conversations. And I think learn a lot about the organization where you can, identify optimization opportunities to really improve the overall business. But it is encouraging those teams to be prepared, have the data, and be able to answer some of those questions. And, that it's that concept of go slow to move fast, right? This notion of why I'm so bothered by just get out there and make 50 calls. You need to be prepared enable your team to be prepared, provide those data sources so that they can go into those conversations with solid understanding, and be inquisitive. Don't be afraid to ask some of those questions. And I think the teams will find that those conversations are a heck of a lot easier than dealing with VP of development or VP of clinical development, when you really start to get in the weeds.
100%, 100%. So let's pivot a little bit. What's a belief you hold about sales and leadership that, a lot of other people may find controversial?
Yeah, I look at this concept of the one-on-one, right? So everybody, you got to meet with your team. You got to meet with your team. But I think that, using those one-on-ones, going back to our days at Oracle, to solely be a forecast review or to, make sure you're staying engaged with these opportunities, it is something that I've just shied away from. Even when I led teams, like I just really struggled with the one-on-one and having this agenda. Let's go through your forecast. I want to engage with my team to enable them, right? What can I do to help you? How can I help take barriers out of your day so you can focus on your work? And to me, I've always been much more effective with my team when I can carve out those times when we're really more focused on how can we work together to get things done. I'm not here to run through the forecast. It's going to be very apparent to me, with analytics and everything else, to be able to see you're not taking your time every day to develop your pipeline. I want to spend my days focusing on, where can I help you align to your client?
So, and this is a topic that this is really a problem that we set out to solve with our consulting company and training company over the past bunch of years with Mike Myers, who and Colin, and then also with the advent of Coachum, which is trying to help managers be better coaches. And we studied a lot of these one-on-ones, and a high percentage of the folks we interviewed, 300 people, and to a person, if we aggregate the responses, the responses were, my manager doesn't meet with me at all. Bad, right?
Bad, right.
My one-on-one turns into a forecast call or a deal review. Bad.
Bad.
Right. Or my manager just, is a really nice person, but he or she asks me about their weekend. Bad. Not bad, but if that's all it is, it's bad. It's not productive. And so what I hear you saying is, it's not so much that you're against you're not saying I'm anti one-on-one. It's you're anti unproductive one-on-ones that turn into deal reviews and forecast calls, but it's more about how can we help this person help their clients, therefore in turn help themselves, help the team, help the company. Without putting words in your mouth, is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And I think back to some experiences I had. I was very fortunate to help lead and grow the private equity practice at ADP. When I took over that team, we were about 5 million in revenue. We had about 5 guys on the team. We grew that to almost 250 million in revenue, 30 people globally about 5 years later. And that growth was really the result of, we were an overlay team. So rather than meeting with the sales team and having their one-on-one and going through deal reviews, we would come prepared, having identified individual companies that were in their forecast that were PE owned and come with solutions, right? So it's this notion of let's come to the table to those meetings prepared with areas where we think we can add value and have that discussion. And maybe based on where that opportunity is going or where that relationship is, we pivot. But I think that really has been the key to my success. And I really I refuse to do those, typical one-on-one forecast meetings. And that preparation is what really drove that overall growth. And then, I was also fortunate. I moved from ADP to Benefit Focus to start their private equity practice. I moved from Benefit Focus over to Infor to do the same thing and take that same process and that same mindset of, this is going to be a value creation team. In fact, when I went to Infor, that process was 5 or 6 months. And I think I had 8 or 9 asks. Like they would offer me the job and I'd say, I'm not going to take the job unless this is an overlay role. Well, that's a bigger, I'm not here to compete with salespeople. I want to add value and to be able to have those sorts of conversations. A month later, they came back, okay, we made the change. And, it's really being able to align with whether that's your team or an overlay sales role to be focused on that value creation, come prepared to do that. It's so key and critical.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It resonated with me what you just said, because when I hear overlay role, like I go a little bit old school and be like, yeah, that's kind of it's a
Expense.
waste of money.
Right.
And when you say, oh, I don't want to compete with salespeople, I'm like, well, why not? Like that's what it's all about. Like that's the old Larry Ellison thing, right? Put two people in a box and let them figure it out. But to the point of if the right types of overlay roles, having the right people in those roles that add value to a group of people,
Yeah,
that's going to drive more value for the client, for the company, et cetera.
that's right.
If you do it right.
Yeah.
A lot of places do it wrong.
Well, that's true. And it's a very specialized role. And in my case, the overlay team was specifically focused on engaging with private equity and venture capital firms, which I think is a very specialized skill. And, there are some moments that I remember. So I came to Infor and I was the first employee in the private equity team, and I grew that out over the years. But I remember a salesperson saying to me, Michael, I have been trying for 6 months to get a meeting with that CEO. You just did it in 3 days. How did you do that? I said, well, that just doesn't happen. It's based on relationships, the planning, and how you go about that request and it's the power of the question, getting an operating partner to ask a question of the CEO and reach out and be collaborative in nature. And those sorts of overlay roles, that is the value, right? Those are the true overlay teams that I think, can create a significant amount of growth for organizations when you do it right. And I am personally passionate about this private equity model that I think is such a unique channel and such a unique go-to-market strategy that also just, it's not something you can just start doing. There's a way to engage with these firms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, topic for another day, but maybe getting rid of the word overlay and, calling it, something else
That's right.
will bring more people into the fold. But the way you
Right.
describe it, it's super powerful,
Yeah.
way to go to market. So let's talk, you talked about a lot of success, and, everybody that comes on, the Coach2Scale podcast has had and enjoyed a lot of success and has helped others do the same, but also a lot of failure, right? And, bang their head against the wall, stub their toe, all that fun stuff. What's a painful lesson that you've learned in this crazy business over the years?
Yeah. So I'll tell a couple of stories and, I'll pull the positive out of that. So as I think about the investor model, this sell to the strategy behind the capital and really engaging with the firm very early in my career, engaging with the investors, I found that there is a pecking order, right? There is a chain of command. And I'll just go back, Matt, I remember going into your office, coming from Marine Corps, right? There's a process, there's a chain of command, right? We need to respect that. But it's very similar in the venture capital and private equity space. And I was working with a salesperson to get involved with a hospitality. It was actually a quick serve restaurant in the Southwest, and we were positioning at ADP a human capital management solution. And I acquired all this information, business strategy, areas where we can drive efficiency. And again, one of my earlier deals, and I went to an operating partner that I had established a relationship with. And I put together a one-page executive summary, right? Overview, background, where we could drive efficiency, next steps, like very, very organized approach. And well, that document ended up landing on the desk of the CFO, who was asked to spend some time with me. And, I remember getting on the phone. There was no video conference at the time. And actually, I got a meeting and I flew down to Dallas. Right. So I walked into this person's office and I think I'll share the organization. It was Polo Loco. Right. So I go in to meet with the PEO and go in to meet with the CFO. And the first thing he said to me is, Michael, all this is great. I appreciate the time. I appreciate you flying down here. I wish you came to me first. Right. I wish you had shared this with me before you went to my board. And, that was a very I'll say painful lesson at first, although we ended up getting, a multi-million dollar, multi-year deal out of that because of the collaborative approach. But that moment, very uncomfortable sitting in that office where, what I learned is I'm always giving executives a chance to engage and approaching that first and respecting that boundary, right? And it's very important that I'm not sharing information to investors that would be construed as, private or something we're working on together. And so taking that mindset as we sell to the strategy behind the capital, I've got a conversation that's going on with an executive team. I have a similar one. I'm not saying I'm not sharing, details around where we could engage, but respecting that boundary and respecting that chain of command and taking a mutual approach that there is no surprise. Or even many times I've said to executives like, hey, I'm going to be sharing these things with the board. I have a review. Before I do, I'd like you to be aware.
Right.
And I think that's so important.
Yeah. So there's the everybody says call high, right? And look, you gave an example earlier where you called high, and that person that was trying to get a meeting for 6 months got it in 6 days or something like that. Like
Right.
calling high can save a lot of time. You get the yes faster, you get the no faster, all that stuff. But then hey, you get in these uncomfortable situations where they're like, "I wish you came to me first." But the flip side of that is you came to them first and they're like, yeah,
Right.
yeah, I don't want you
Right.
talking to my people. Right.
Right.
You get blocked. So it's, I guess, let me ask you this. Did you
Well,
know?
Matt, I just want to jump on that one because I have been like for the last 15 years, I've been very clear with teams, do not ask for permission. Right? I'm not asking for
How does
permission
that sound? So how does
to
that
go.
sound? Because I
I think
agree with
it's
you, but like, I think a lot of people, he's just starting out. Like, you might not know like how that sounds or how to train that, teach someone else to do that. I'm
yeah.
interested in your opinion. So
Yeah, I think it's very much based on data and matter of fact, like I'm excited to collaborate with you. I'd like to understand a bit more about some of the goals you have for the organization, both short and midterm. I'm going to be meeting. We've got a relationship with a private equity firm, and I've got my a conversation with them next week, and I'd like to be able to share some of the insights here. And if somebody says, well, I'd appreciate you not sharing these sorts of things, I would come right back and say, my role is to support the private equity team and, certainly, to be able to share some of this information. And there's that boundary there, right? So they may tell you things that are very personal, but I'm not asking for permission to go to the board members. I am already there.
yeah,
I'm
well,
already there.
that's a good point. I'm already there. But even if you're not there, it's like, hey, when I do this, I want to be part of it. There's a way to do it so that it's collaborative, not divisive. I
But
would,
it's also very that's right. I'm not strong arming them. I'm here telling you that I'm going to be sharing this information. And I just don't want you to be surprised.
yeah, and it's super important to be confident
Yeah.
about how you do that and do your homework.
Matt, could I have one other example that
Yeah,
I'd love to share
please.
as it relates to, the learning lessons, and especially when you're dealing at this level. So, we're very fortunate to live in the Northeast in between, Boston and New York. I think it's something like 86% of the private equity and venture capital firms are located in this area. And, specifically in my space in life sciences, there are some funds and firms that are very specific to, therapeutics, diagnostics, med device. But I'm going back to an example at ADP where we were engaged with a very prominent firm in Boston and very excited working with an operating partner. We had worked over a year to establish trust and credibility. They were making introductions on our behalf. And this notion of sell to the strategy behind the capital, understand and be prepared for those conversations. And fortunately, or unfortunately, I wasn't on this call, but one of my team members had brought a specialty salesperson into a conversation with a portfolio company. Right. So imagine this call. You have ADP core sales rep, you have a private equity overlay, and then a specialty salesperson, an operating partner for the firm, and then an executive at the portfolio company. And this specialized salesperson had not really been prepared, up front, was not as familiar with our strategy around private equity. and was saying a few things that at the end of the day made the operating partner didn't look so great. Or it said, yeah, we can't do that, but this is what we can do. So this build up and introduction essentially embarrassed the operating partner in front of one of their portfolio companies. And I will tell you, like, talk about a hard lesson learned. I spent the next 5 years working with my team to get back into that company from every angle possible. And we were never able to break back in. That relationship was over. And I think it really is a painful lesson to understand that when you're engaging, especially at the investor level or some of these firms that could have 250 or 300 portfolio companies that are an opportunity for us as value creation sales individuals to engage, those were off the table and never came back. So it's this notion of be prepared, understand those conversations, go into those conversations with that value creation mindset and make sure everybody's aware, because that is one I will never forget.
Yeah.
And the last time that happened.
Yeah, that's a crazy story, but it happens all the time, especially without preparation. I mean, you could write a chapter in the book. Don't embarrass your executive sponsor. Don't embarrass the private equity partner. Yeah, no shit. But it happens. No one sets out to do it. It just happens that way. And my son, you've met my son many moons ago,
way back.
And I think I remember, did he meet Mr. James? Did he go and like give you a hug? Like I kind of remember that. Like he walked in.
That's one of the, I will never forget that, Matt. It was Jack, right? His name's Jack.
Yeah.
So Jack was in your office. I came in, and at the time, I was developing in my own, as a father, and maybe a little nervous. And Jack came in and gave me one of the best hugs that I ever got. And I don't know how old he was, 2 or 3, but I will never forget the hug from Jack in the corner office.
That's funny. Now that kid's 6'6".
Right.
And he just on Friday got promoted to account executive at his company. So he's excited. But one of the things I always tell him is, your job is to make your boss look good. Like that's not your full job. You have other responsibilities, but one of them is to make your boss look good, not bad. Your job is to make your executive sponsor, your the main point of contact, like make them look good, not bad.
That's
right. So,
thanks. But the impact in that scenario was about 300 companies that we never had the support from the executive team ever again. It was such a blow. And when you look at ADP, we probably had 300. I mean, you look at firms like Blackstone, right? Last I looked, they had 875 portfolio companies, over 1.1 trillion in AUM. That's so incredible. So, it's this notion of be a valuable. I always looked at my role, and I continue today. I just had this conversation with a private equity firm. We have an office in Harvard Square. Sitting in our office, and I heard him say it. I think of you as an extension of our operating team. And that's the goal, right? To truly be an advisor. And at RCP, my goal is to act as that commercialization arm for our private equity partners as we look across their portfolio to optimize commercialization.
So let's pivot, let's segue and go there. You're at RCP now, Rapid Commercialization Partners. And that's a little bit different than what you've been doing. So let's tell us what RCP does and what motivated you and excited you to do this.
Yeah. So my wife and I founded Rapid Commercialization Partners about 5 years ago. And it was really my wife's brainchild who came to the table, whose, career is basically in biotech, but realized the amount of inefficiency that, the biotech space was really engaged in as they were looking to bring drugs to market, and said, there's got to be a better way. And what if she could bring all of the best people together across core commercial disciplines like market access, medical affairs, regulatory, and core commercial, and in a fractional manner, be able to engage with some of these small emerging biotech companies to help optimize commercialization. And for me, it's a very different business than I have been engaged in throughout my career, but it has been, for me, it's the business of biotech, right? And really understanding that commercialization journey and the role of the investor, right? Going back to sell to the strategy behind the capital. And, so I lead our private market practice at Rapid Commercialization Partners. And my role is to really engage with private equity and venture capital funds that have a therapeutics, diagnostics, and med device centric portfolio. And as we've been talking through this discussion, engage with managing directors and operating partners to identify therapeutics companies within their portfolio that either fit our experience or their clinical phase of development, where we could engage, again, on a fractional basis across our 22 consultants, spanning those core disciplines, in a very capital efficient manner to help move them to that next inflection point very quickly. And, what's unique in my space is all of the companies that I'm engaging with are pre-revenue. Right? And this is all about investment to get those drugs to market and move to the next inflection point where they can realize that next level of investment. And for us, our sweet spot is really phase 2 of clinical development. They've got safety, quality, tox data, and they start to think about what does it mean to bring this drug to market. And I tell you, I've sat in many, many meetings with investors, both with prospects and clients. And very early on, as they're looking for that next level of funding, that 5 or 10 million to get into the clinic or move to the next phase of development. And they're asked those questions around pricing or regulatory risk or the competitive environment, and not really being able with confidence to be able to answer those questions. And, you could do a full-blown, market access and pricing strategy and spend $500,000 to really get into what is the price going to be? But it's all about being capital efficient and sell to the strategy behind the capital. So they may have some of those early investors trying to either create a partnership with big pharma, go public, or realize incremental investment from additional funds, or take this thing commercial right from the beginning. Right. So understanding where they're going is critical. So if they're going out looking for incremental levels of investment, how can we as RCP to engage, again, in a very capital efficient manner to go in and say, let us talk to some insurers or some payers and understand what else is out there and what's the pricing look like, or speak to some payer KOLs and do some competitive analysis. And then when you're in those conversations, and ask those questions, talk to us about pricing, or what does the market look like, or what price do you think you can support?
Yeah.
Now, when you can answer those questions with validation from a firm like RCP, you go that much further. Because if you just come with some desktop research, you're going to be very hard pressed to move to that second meeting with an investor without being able to answer some of those questions.
So true. So Michael, if people are interested in learning more, how can they get that? How can they find it?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is www.rcpbio.com, and you can reach out to myself and my LinkedIn profile, and very easy to get a hold of us. The one other interesting piece I talk about, Matt, is, with my experience in private equity and that engagement that I just talked about, we actually found, especially over the last couple of years, that we have clients and prospects that are looking for very small incremental levels of funding to get them to that next level, to a firm that may be willing to commit 10, 15, $25 million to get them into the clinic. So I'm really excited. Over the last year, we launched RCP Venture Capital, where we are looking to raise a $50 million fund. We're targeting an early $10 million close to fund several portfolio companies that we've targeted and signed non-binding agreements with. And our vision is really to use RCP as operational support to the fund. So not only being able to deploy just capital, but now operational expertise to move them through the commercialization journey, get them to that next incremental inflection point, and get that larger level investment to get them through the clinic. And it's really an exciting time for us. And we've got multiple opportunities, whether that's deploying capital through a fund or creating a SPV for an individual asset. we've got the flexibility and the commercial support to be very successful. And I think, the feedback we've got over the last year is there's nobody else doing what we're doing. So we're in a very unique space.
Super exciting. Good for you. Good for you. So Michael, Coach2Scale Podcast, we talk about coaching and developing and leading, and we bring on people who care about that stuff. Who's a coach? Who is a person whose coaching has had an impact on your career? You can go anywhere you want with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I go in two ways. So, I go back to my VP at ADP when I moved into the private equity space, which, for me was very exciting to be able to join a team like that, very unique position. But this notion of really being able to understand this, this sell to follow the money, or sell to the strategy behind the capital, really came from that. And that was Matt Otten, my VP at ADP, who has changed the direction of my career, because I just think this notion of engaging with a private equity and venture capital fund to truly understand their investment strategy and the goals of their individual portfolio company to help them realize their investment is really changed everything about how I've gone to market.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like when you first met Matt back then, did you think you'd be talking about him like however many years later? It's
Right.
it's so cool that people can have that impact on others. So thanks for sharing that. On a similar thread, Michael, who's your favorite coach? It doesn't have to be sports, but just like a name I would say that a lot of people would know, like a celebrity type name.
I'm going to throw out my celebrity name is Vince Lombardi. Right. And if you ask my high school son, who's now at Northeastern University, every day driving him to Thayer Academy and Braintree, like, my statement is on time is late. Right. And Vince Lombardi's statement was if you're early, you're on time. And if you're on time, you're late. Right. And it's not so much just about being on time and that punctuality. Right. But it's going back to what we talked about through the whole podcast, which is being prepared, having respect for your colleagues and clients. That drives so much efficiency, right? To be able to be on time, be early, and prepared to engage makes all the difference. And I think, that's something that I've lived by. You'll see me showing up to my podcast early. I want to fall into my space, be prepared, and ready to add value for my clients, prospects, and partners.
And I'll just add on to that, and I'll tell you that my wife says I don't always live up to this, but my drill instructor said, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late, and if you're late, you're effed. So, Anyway,
Exactly.
so just curious, because you're a curious person. You educate yourself on a lot of things. If you could read a book, listen to a podcast, or maybe even more importantly, if you had to give a talk tomorrow to a wide variety, a diverse group of people on a leadership type topic, coaching type topic, what topic would it be? Why?
Matt, I think about my own experience here over the last 5 years. So I left Infor, leading their private equity practice, had a great role, exciting career. And, to me, there was an opportunity to leverage all of those skills that I had developed over the last 25 years and build something like RCP. So whether it was a book or a podcast, to me, it would really be about how do you lead a group of people to launch your own endeavor? And, Matt, I know you've done the same thing as you've launched your independent businesses. And I think so many people that I've talked to, really some old friends, have said, Michael, I wish I had the courage to do something like that. And it really is a leap of faith. And to be able to spend some time, whether that's a book, again, or a podcast, like how do you take a group of people to lead them around an idea? And in my case, like commercialization optimization in the life sciences space. That's something I've ever done before. I am curious. I love the science. I have an aptitude for the science. I don't have to go deep. I can skim across the top, but it's how do you take different people with different areas of expertise, to bring that together to create an organization like RCP. And that falls across partners. It falls across consultants, investors, clients and prospects. It is an exercise of leading and really building upon everybody's strengths. And I think what I've seen over the last 5 years is, it has been a huge amount of work, incredibly rewarding for both my wife and I personally, but also for our clients and our investment partners. And I'm just, fueled by this notion of like going out and creating your own businesses, but also tying it to that investment space. Because for me personally, launching a venture capital fund over the last year between legal, TPAs, third-party administrators, SEC compliance, K1s, banking relationships, I feel like I just got a master's in finance, a practical master's in finance. And, I am just so interested in how these things come together to launch businesses. And for me, we are on the precipice as we go to launch our fund to really, truly help our clients and our own portfolio companies to grow to that next space. So that is where I would be spending my time for sure. And I am passionate about it.
Well, I think that's an awesome place to leave it. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about the importance of helping clients and focusing on the client. We talked about following the money or selling to the strategy behind the capital. We talked about understanding what clients' goals are. While it may not always be the right way to go to call high, there needs to be different strategies within the account. We talked about painful lessons that are out there and learning from them. So appreciate everything that you brought to our conversation today.
Yeah, and Matt, it's so good to see you. And I think you made a comment last time we spoke that, those teams, those core teams that you've had over the years, and I forget what your exact words are, but those team members continue to be on the same team as we progress in our careers. And it was such a good sentiment. And I appreciate us staying in touch and expect to do so, in the future.
Yeah, I referenced a theme from one of the guests that was on the show. His name was David Premer, and he talked about this concept of sales team for life. And
Yes.
that's what I was talking about there. That really, really, really cool stuff. So thanks, Michael. And thanks everybody out there for watching and listening. We appreciate you doing that. Let us know you're out there. Engage with us on LinkedIn. Put a comment in there. Let us know what you like and what you'd like to see more of. Let us know what you're thinking. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube Coach2Scale YouTube channel. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.